The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. On behalf of IAUG, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Google DialogFlow CX in the Avaya Cloud, presented by Nick Kwiatkowski from IAUG. Thank you for participating in today's webinar and for your continued support in the IAUG webinar program. Before we begin, I do have 3 quick housekeeping items to go over. First, today's webinar will be recorded and available for on-demand viewing in our IAUG member webinar library. Second, a Q&A session will follow today's presentation. All questions will need to be entered in the question window near the bottom of your GoToWebinar screen. Please submit your questions at any time throughout the presentation. And third, there will be a short evaluation that pops up as you exit the webinar. Please make sure to take a minute and let us know what you thought of today's session and what you might like to see going forward. Now let's get started. I would now like to turn things over to Nick.
Great, thank you very much. Hi everybody, I'm Nick Kwiatkowski from Michigan State University. We're going to be talking about Google Dialogflow CX and the Avaya Cloud CPaSS. So what is Dialogflow CX or Google Dialogflow CX? It is a cloud-based conversational machine language engine from Google that is designed around contact centers and agent interactions. That is just a ton of words that really what it means is a next generation IVR and chatbot system really built on artificial intelligence. So it's a really cool system that allows you to build those, the conversational systems. So very similar to like what you're used to with Amazon Alexa, Google Now, those types of things, Siri, all that type of stuff. Essentially, we're able to build those into our, very simplistically, into our communication systems as an IVR to allow people to naturally talk to your systems and be able to, do things. Google Dialogflow CX is a product from Google that has recently been brought into what they call the early release stage. It is generally available, so you can enable it on your system. You can enable it on the Avaya CPaSS side and actually use it today. Not all the documentation is fully rounded out yet. Not all the features are in there yet that they want, but it is a very functional system right now. So even though it is brand spanking new, and when I say brand spanking new, it's still in the bleeding edge side, what really makes it worth looking into? Like I said, it's a brand new product from Google designed around extending Google's conversational power into the contact centers. So Google themselves has learned just a ton about conversational voice interactions through their Google Home products and Google Assistant on Android devices. The hardest part with any type of voice system, if you've ever had to use these systems like from Nuance or from any other system, is that it takes a lot of time to train them. It's very complicated to set them up, to get everything working just right. You have to set different types of profiles and all that type of stuff. Essentially, Google's done all this for us because they've got all this history over the last probably 6 or 7 years through the Google Assistant, Google Home, and all these other types of things that people are using day in and day out. So they literally have millions, if not billions, of trainings that they've already done, probably billions into even more. So yeah, the neat thing about this particular product is instead of training for exact words or keywords and all that type of stuff, it actually breaks down everything into breaks down those phrases people are asking your system into actions. It allows you to trigger on those actions. It's able to extract nouns out of phrases and queries and store them for decisions later on. So it's one of the first systems I've ever been able to see where you can just type in a few sentences to train it, and then it goes and figures out what you're trying to ask the thing to search for. And then when people start using it, it will build that taxonomy. So it builds all this like artificial intelligence in the background, and then it starts matching based on those things that you are asking of it. So in really, in about a half hour to an hour, you can sit down with this thing, completely program a fully working IVR to transfer, let's say, between a few different contact centers and have it working. Now, of course, there's always going to be, nuances and all that type of stuff as far as, do we treat every edge case, all that type of stuff. But this system is really built for, getting it up and working in, the least amount of time possible. So let's do a quick demo here. So at Michigan State University, our first Google Dialogflow CX product that we are putting out there into production is actually for our healthcare group. So we have 14 clinics that we are dealing with, ranging from radiology to sports medicine, pediatrics, all these other different types of groups. And we're actually going to be putting this Google Dialogflow in front of those contact centers. Right now, we're in a situation, particularly with COVID, where our healthcare workers need to really be retasked to dealing directly with patients, doing as much with patients as we can, and having our more experienced healthcare workers answering the phone isn't the best use of our healthcare workers side, and it's really not the best use of our patient side. There's a lot of things that they should be able to self-help with that, they don't quite know how to ask. They don't know, the best way to do some of these things. And we're able to build a lot of these types of Q&A into our healthcare IVR. I'm calling it an IVR and doing air quotes here, but it's not. It's this AI system to better serve, our constituents as well as our employees. So I've got this hooked up right now with my Avaya system, and I'm going to go dial into it right now. So hopefully you can hear this.
Thank you for calling the MSU Health Clinics. How can I help you today?
When's the radiology clinic open?
The pediatrics clinic accepts patients from 8 a.m. until 5.
And that completely failed because my dogs are barking in the background. So hold on just a second here again. Let me call again.
Thank you for calling the MSU Health Clinics. How can I help you today?
When's the radiology clinic open?
Our radiology department is open from 5 a.m. until 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday. What else can I help you with?
So that's just a really basic example of just a Q&A of that going back and forth. If I want to do something a little more complicated, where we're talking about a back and forth, let's do one of those as well.
Thank you for calling the MSU Health Clinics. How can I help you today?
I need to speak with a nurse.
Which clinic can I connect you with?
The Okemos Pediatrics.
I would normally be connecting you to the nurse from pediatrics, but I have not yet been programmed to do so. Sorry.
And that's actually a response that I put in there. If I want to do the same thing where I'm actually calling out to the real clinic, that's something that's, I just put in the phone number. So let's do a much more complicated example where I'm actually going to go and create an appointment. And I'll show you what the programming with is in just a moment.
Thank you for calling the MSU Health Clinics. How can I help you today?
I need to make an appointment.
Which clinic do you want to schedule the appointment with?
Sports medicine.
What do you need to be seen for?
My elbow's not connected anymore.
It looks like I have appointments available starting next Monday the 2nd. Which day works best for you?
Wednesday.
Does the morning, afternoon, or evening work best for you?
Afternoon.
Okay. I have an opening in the sports medicine clinic on the 27th of January 2021 for your injury at 1 p.m. Will that work for you?
Yes.
Great. I'll get that booked for you. You will get an email shortly with the details. If you can make sure to be there at least 15 minutes early with the paperwork listed in the email, we would appreciate it. Is there anything else I can help with?
No. So again, that was just a really, this is an IVR that, we've all been through and all that type of stuff. But, what really gets powerful is when we start talking about the programming of how we've built this thing. And of course, I was just, that was a pretty natural conversation. I didn't have to say any keywords or things like that. I could have been actually a lot more loose with the type of language that I gave it. But, so that's kind of where we're at. So let's dive into how this kind of is built in the background. So this system here, like I said, is kind of built around the Avaya CPaSS. Avaya CPaSS, if you don't know it, is a product from Avaya, formerly known as Zang.io. And I may still refer to it as Zang.io a few times here. But in this case here, I was actually going through my phone system. So I have an on-prem Avaya communication manager with that's built in, that's SIP connected and all that type of stuff. And I've got a SIP trunk that goes up to the Avaya CPaSS. I could have easily just exposed a public phone number that you could call into, and then that would connect to the same system as well. In the background, what's happening is the Avaya CPaSS then connects up to Google DialogFlow CX using a protocol known as gRPC. And then there's the programming that's actually done within the Google DialogFlow CX. That provides all the voice utterances. It provides all the language understanding and all that going back and forth. And then the Google Dialogflow CX can then talk to, let's say, a company database, like it just did with that appointment system. We could also have a chatbot on our website talk to the Google Dialogflow CX as well. So you can actually have one system built for not only natural language chatting, but also a voice call like we just showed just now. So the system can also transfer to agents. You can transfer directly into any type of VDNs. You can do all that type of stuff, very easily by just transfer messages. You can also do barge-ins. So if a user has let's say they get lost in the system and you're able to detect that, you can actually have a system barge in. So you can have an agent take over the phone call. You can have it, there's a lot of stuff you can do with this as we go into it. So the Avaya Cloud CPaSS, again, formerly known as Zang.io, is one of the first CPaSS providers to have native integration with Google Dialogflow CX. It is, again, this is still very early on. The product itself has really only been available publicly for a few months at this point. So we're probably going to be expecting other providers to join as well, but know that Avaya is one of the first ones to do this really tight integration. Your Google Dialogflow application, once integrated, shows up as an available application on the CPaSS dashboard. Pretty much when you go to program or to set up your Google Dialogflow application, there's an integrations button that you hit. You say, I want to integrate with Avaya CPaSS. It then pulls up the Avaya CPaSS website. You log in and it just shows up. There's no complicated API keys you have to do or programming or anything like that. Literally, for the stuff that I just showed just now, involved just programming just on, or essentially like building stuff in Visio. There wasn't a whole lot else that had to happen. So just some of the concepts as we start going through when I show the programming interface and all that stuff, there's things to know in the AI world known as entity types. So you can think of these as the nouns when we're having a conversation. When you do the programming with Dialogflow CX, you're literally doing programming as a conversation. So you type in something like, what time is Kirk Jones available for a haircut? Or how much for that doggy in the window and things like that. So an entity type is those nouns that you're trying to extract out of a conversation to do an action with. So, for example, one of the things was when I said I needed to speak with a nurse at Okemos Pediatrics. Or what time is the radiology clinic open? So that radiology clinic is the piece that I was really searching for. And then I could make a decision on that, and I could actually give back different times of day depending on what noun was given to me by the user talking. So an example of that, again, is what I'd like to order a new TV, and TV is something I can trigger on so I can ask additional follow-up questions. Or, the name Kirk Jones is something I'm searching for so I can look at his calendar versus somebody else's. There are things called intents. Intents are the actual phrases that somebody would say to trigger an action. So think of the things that you'd actually say in real life. My colleague that is helping build this actually for our healthcare group, she, when we started building this, I kept on stepping back and saying, okay, when you think about this, step back and say, if we were to have an actual conversation, so don't think of this as programming a bot or programming a VDN or something like that, where I always have to ask these leading questions. If I were to call an agent and they pick up after you say hello back and forth, what do I say to trigger an action? So me as somebody calling into the healthcare group might say, hey, I need to make an appointment, or, I need to schedule a follow-up for, with Dr. Medved or something like that. So once you start doing these things, these are known as intents. So it's an actionable thing that I then can cause something to happen. When you build these, essentially Google recommends that you do at least 10 phrases per intent. And again, these phrases, I'll show this in just a moment. The neat thing is, once you've put in these 10 or so phrases into the system, the machine learning system in the background starts building a taxonomy about how are people going to be asking this. So you don't actually have to write in every single 1,000 ways that somebody may ask for something. You put in 10, and then Google goes and figures out, okay, I'm going to build in the background a database of the 1,000 ways somebody may ask this based on these 10 that somebody put in here. That's part of that artificial intelligence piece. And again, that's what really makes this thing really, really strong and powerful. Because again, you think of like the really bad IVRs, like you call into a credit card company or something like that, and you say, I need to pay my bill, but they didn't program that exact phrase, so you never match on it. This over here will figure out the different ways somebody may ask for that particular intent or that particular action, and then figure out based on that. So in DialogFlow CX, they have something called pages. So pages are essentially the action that somebody's looking to take. So once we figured out the phrase that somebody asks to do an action, the page is actually that action that is happening. So a lot of times when we go to do an action, there might be follow-up questions, or there's required additional pieces of information that we need in order to do something. So those are known as parameters, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But the pages can output fulfillments. Fulfillments essentially can be a spoken word, transferring a call to another number, transferring to an agent, maybe doing a web service call, or interacting with your database in order to do an action. So pages are essentially like, what do we do once we know what the person wants, has told us what they want us to do? Routes are tied up to pages, and essentially routes are what is triggered when a certain set of conditions are met. These can transfer control to another page, end a session, or essentially like hang up or do something else. The important thing is routes can be conditional, meaning that you can take, very similar to vector programming, based on a variable or based on something that has happened in that session, you can then transfer the call or essentially take a route based on one of those things. So you can make decisions based on session variables. So that can include like the nouns that were previously collected or things like that. So again, this is looking very similar to when you're programming a vector if you step back and look at it. I mentioned parameters, but parameters are something that Google Dialogflow can ask the user, similar to like a form fill. So when I was showing the demo, or when you were listening to the demo of when I was making the appointment, there were a bunch of follow-up questions. So I was being asked one question at a time. So parameter essentially is, what are those questions? What are those bits of data that I need in order to fulfill an action? So those parameters can be optional. They can be mandatory. The neat thing is, once you've collected a parameter, so a variable somewhere in that conversation, I can then fill that in. I don't have to ask it again. So if I would have had a single call there where I first asked the hours of radiology, and then I wanted to make an appointment, the system won't ask again, what clinic am I talking about, because it already knew that answer because I gave it before. So that's really what those parameters are. And again, I'll show that here in just a moment. The fulfillment, again, is that action that's being fulfilled back to the caller. That can be like a spoken word, that can be a transferred call, that could be writing to a database, that could be something that is fulfilled to the end user. And then webhooks are essentially the Google Dialogflow system connecting with another service to either push or pull data. For example, when I was booking that appointment, it was actually talking to an appointment system to find out when that next when that next appointment was available, and communicating back and forth. And then when I said yes, that appointment will work, it actually wrote that as a calendar entry onto my calendar. So the question here that came back, if the bot can't answer the question or the user wants to take a route to an actual person or agent, how does the agent see what's already been interacted with? So that is something that you can program with essentially. Right now, the documentation is pretty light on how you do this, but you will need to build in something so that the agent can see that data that is captured by the Google Dialogflow system. So that is something that is available, but it's probably going to require something that you program on your side, so that gets a little more complicated. In my case, we're actually going to be building a system probably within AACC through a screen pop. So when the call ends up at the user, that we can see that data that comes in. So all the different parameters that they filled in, all the different options that they've seen. So you are able to get that data back fairly easily. You just need to do some additional programming at this point. So just kind of want to, again, put this together really quick. You've got an entity type, which again are those nouns that we're collecting. Those can either go to a parameter, which is included in a form, or they can go into an intent, which goes into a parameter, which goes into a form. But enough PowerPoints that actually show what Dialogflow looks like in real life. So this is the Google Dialogflow programming system. You can see it looks kind of similar to Visio. So a call will come in, and it goes to the start module over here, and then I've got a bunch of other pages that that essentially are these actions. So before I go into how these are kind of set up, I'm going to go into the intents. So I mentioned earlier, an intent is a phrase that can be given, or essentially a set of phrases that are spoken to figure out like what we're really looking to do. So I'll look at the clinic hours, for example. So over here, you'll see I typed in a few different phrases that I'm suggesting that Google would say that, my users would end up saying. So things like, what time are you open? What time is the doctor taking appointments? What hours are you open? What days are you open? Those types of things. So if the user says any of these or anything that is similar to those, or anything that the Google Dialogflow system can extrude to be like these, it'll then trigger that intent. And then I can tie that intent to do some sort of action through a route. So if I look at another one here really quick, pay bill, somebody might say billing department, please. Somebody might say I need to pay my bill, those types of things. So again, the more of these that we have, the more taxonomy Google has as far as, knowing that a user wants to take this particular action. So let's go into entity types. So these are the things that, the nouns that we're trying to collect. So if I say, for example, the clinic names, so these are the list of the different clinic names that I can make decisions on. But as you all know, when somebody calls in, they don't necessarily know the exact name of a clinic. So I don't necessarily want to say the spine and orthopedic center. It might be that somebody says, I need to talk to the ortho clinic, or I need to talk to the spine clinic, or things like that. So I can actually put in synonyms for each one of these nouns. And then that way, the Google system, if it hears any types of those words, it'll know which bucket to put into and actually correct the entity based on that. So when I'm doing decisions, I only have to test on spine and orthopedic center, even though they may have said ortho, they may have said spine, or really as many of these as I want to put in there. Now, the neat thing is we can also do what they call fuzzy matching. So if a user was close, but they didn't say one of these things exactly, we can have it so it auto matches that. And then the neat thing is if a user says something incorrectly enough times, or there's a lot of people that keep on calling, let's say, our family medicine group as something else, and that seems to be the correct match, I can actually have it automatically add entities into this list, or the synonyms into these lists as it's matching. So the question is there an auto translator? So at this time, there's not an automatic translator for these different entities and all that type of stuff. Like I said, the product is still very new, but it is multilingual. So you can actually set this up for multiple languages and auto detect what language somebody is talking in, and I believe it will say the correct utterances or the correct fulfillments based on their language. I haven't tested that myself, but that is something that they've talked about in the documentation. So let's go to actually build something. So like I said, when a phone call comes in or a chatbot comes in, we hit the start piece. And on here, I'm going to tie into all the different places that somebody could want to go to when they first call in. So, for example, that clinic hours, this this route over here goes to a clinic hour, and I essentially tie in that intent. So, if somebody says, something that can trigger this intent, I can do conditions. So I can say if the time of day is something, or if I know that the clinic name is something, then I can choose what I want to do. So the fulfillment piece, right now I'm not doing a particular agent says or a particular voice response back. In this case here, I'm transitioning to a page which has additional things. So again, on these different transition routes, there's also event handlers on here as well. So if something goes wrong, because that's one of the questions that you get fairly often is, okay, I've called into IVRs, they completely suck. What happens if, I need to talk to an agent, or I need to bail out. So these event handlers are that what if case. So if we didn't get a particular input for a certain amount of time, we can go and say something. So this one here, I've got a few things that the agent can say. If it hears silence, hey, I didn't get that. Can you say it again? Sorry, could you say that again? And essentially the Google Dialogflow system will pick one of these to respond back. So it actually is going to say something different every single time. I can actually set something on here where if I didn't hear something after X amount of time, to automatically bail out to a live agent. The same thing with the not being able to match something. So if the user said something once or twice or three times or whatever, however many times I want to program that, if it goes in here and says, hey, the agent wasn't able to match something, and says, sorry, can you say that again? Sorry, I didn't get that. Can you please rephrase? I can actually put leading questions in here as well as say, can you, ask me about billing, ask me about prescription refill, ask me about scheduling a surgery, to kind of prompt the user what I'm actually looking for. But again, I can also have a bailout in here as well. So if after a certain amount of time or certain number of failed entity or transactions, I can have a bailout to a live user and possibly give back that live user or that live agent information about, what did they try? What were the things that the Google Dialogflow system understood that they tried to say, and trying to give some more taxonomy so the agent doesn't have to start completely from scratch. Again, that's something that you have to build, so that is a little bit more complicated to set up, but that's all built in here. So if I go into one of these pages over here, I've got an entry dialog where I can go and say something as soon as they get to that particular section. But more importantly, I can have parameters. So again, these parameters are things that bits of information that I need in order to fulfill the action for the user. So for the hours, considering I've got so many clinics set up, I need to know what clinic they're asking about to know what hours to give them back. So in this case here, if I didn't know what, if I didn't say what the clinic name was when I was asking for, like when I was doing that fulfillment, the system will then come back and say, what clinic do you need the hours for? And then as long as they say something that matches one of my entity types, I can then, I then store that as a variable. So one of the most powerful pieces of this, of the CX system is when I'm building my entities. So again, if I go to this clinic hours, some of the entities I can start to automatically fill in those parameters. So if somebody says, when is the radiology clinic open? I don't need to ask a follow-up saying, what clinic are you talking about? Because they already told me. If they didn't give it to me, that's an optional thing. And then I have to ask a follow-up question for that. So in this case here, the parameter is required. If they didn't, if I call in and they didn't tell me what it is, I'll ask the follow-up question, what clinic? And then I have in here a few transition routes that say, If I'm talking about the radiology clinic, this is, or in this case here, I'm not talking about radiology. This is the response that I give. So the clinic name accepts patients from 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, but is closed for university and federal holidays. Is there anything else I can help you with? And then I transition back to the start. So I'm back to that the beginning. If they're asking about radiology, I give a custom response for radiology that says the radiology department is open from 5 a.m. until 9 p.m. But I can really do as many of these exceptions as I need. So a question came in here, can DialogFlow CX recognize DTMF input? Yes, it can. There's those are actually coming through as variables. So these conditions on here, I can say if the DTMF digit equals 1, do this, or if DTMF digit equals 2, do this. So there is definitely ways that you can do conditional logic based off of DTMF digits. Now, when you're putting these together, don't fall into the trap of, I just want to rebuild my IVR in this system. Think about how can I do this as a natural language? That way you're not limited to that back and forth response, because if you start getting to the mindset of, I need to say 1 for this, 2 for this, 3 for this, it starts breaking that conversational logic, and then you're back into a back and forth IVR as opposed to really having a conversation. Because that's where this really becomes magic. So again, for the more complicated system of I need to making an appointment, I actually have quite a few parameters, and you heard me go back and forth. What is the clinic name? What is the reason for the visit? What is the day? What day of the visit? What time? And then I go and transfer that to another page where I actually do a web service call to my reservation system, and it can actually make that reservation, put it on a calendar, all that type of stuff. So that's really what we're talking about when we build these things here. There's a lot of moving parts. Like I said, there's the entities, there's all these different things. But when you start getting into it, it starts to become pretty natural to build these things. Testing to show what the chatbot is on this. Let me go and show you what a chatbot would look like if I were to integrate this to a web page. So let me go wake it up here and say hi. It says, thank you for calling MSU Health Clinics. What can I help you with? When are you open? What clinic do you need the hours for? If I can say sports medicine. Sports medicine clinic accepts patients from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. Again, it's figured out this parameter of sports medicine. So if I ask something else, it won't actually do that follow-up. So I can then say I need to speak with a nurse. So I normally be connecting you to the sports medicine, but I've not been programmed to do that. Sorry, goodbye. And again, it didn't ask that follow-up question of what clinic do I need to talk to, or what clinic do you need to talk with a nurse. It already figured that out because I'd already collected that clinic name from the previous question. So you can really start to get really complicated things and pepper the caller with different questions as you're going along and not have to re-ask those things. The data that can be presented to the end user, so if I were to transfer to an agent, is all the stuff that you see here on the right-hand side in the simulator. Again, the clinic name. The other neat thing is too, you can get that sentiment. So is the user positive, or are they negative? Are they angry? Are they happy? That type of stuff. You start getting some of those things as you have these interactions back and forth. So with that, I think that's the stuff I wanted to show with the system here. Oh yeah, when you get to the point that you actually want to do the integration, so you build out this really cool system, you can do the testing with the chatbot, all that type of stuff. To integrate it with Avaya Cloud, really you just go to this integrations piece, you click on the Avaya thing, you then log in, and then it'll actually show up as an application. When you're in the Avaya CPaSS program, or essentially the console where you can sign phone numbers and all that type of stuff, you literally just say, I want to configure this with DialogFlow. Here's the agent name, which is what I've got this hooked up to. And that's pretty much all you have to do. There's not a whole lot of work that you have to do on the Avaya CPaSS side. Again, you can associate this with internal trunks, phone numbers, all that type of stuff to make it pretty easy. So as far as the integrations are concerned, you can get a list of the integrations and how these are all different, how these are all set up with the different systems here. So again, pretty easy to set up and work with on here as well. So let's continue the slides really quick. So as far as Followup is concerned, if you want to find out more information about the Avaya Cloud CPaSS, you can go to accounts.avayacloud.com and set up, buy a phone number or do integrations via SIP on your internal system to Avaya Cloud CPaSS to kind of get all this to work natively. Instead of buying phone numbers, super easy. Google DialogFlow CX, cloud.google.com/dialogflow/cx/docs to get you started. Like I said, the documentation on this is still quickly evolving. So there's not, they've got the basics in there so far, but there's not a whole lot built out. I'm actually writing a couple of blog entries right now that I'll be posting on the IUG website in the technical forums if you want to get some more like in-depth videos on how all this kind of comes together and all that stuff. But the things that I kind of showed here are like really the basics on putting things together and building a basic IVR. So with that, we've actually got about 20 minutes for questions. So I see a few people have asked some already. Let's see here. So just a moment while I pull these up. And some I've answered already as we've been going through. Just a moment here while I pull these up here. So at some point, can I talk about the process of getting the account set up in Google Dialogflow and Avaya CPaSS? I actually did show that already. So it's just a matter of going to that integration piece. You do need to sign up for an account both on Avaya CPaSS and on Google Dialogflow first before you go into that direction. But once you have those pieces in place, you should be able to go and do that. Is Google Dialogflow have any of the following capabilities? Voice biometrics, emotion detection, upset customers. So the quick question on that, voice biometrics at this point, I do not believe it has questions for that. Emotion detection, yes, it does. That is something that is exposed via the web service call. So every time that you do a web service call out to your database or anywhere else, you will actually get all the emotion detection and all the analytics for that. Also, AEP 7.2.3 only supports Google Dialog or Dialogflow ASR and not TTS. Any plans to work with Avaya to enable this? Unfortunately, I don't work for Avaya, so I can't speak for their plans on the Dialogflow ASR, not TTS. So that is something somebody from Avaya is probably going to have to answer. The question of what's behind the doctor name entity list, I can show that really quick. But that's literally, in my case, that's just a list of doctors that I've got in this demo right here. Going back. I've got 2 doctors listed on here and synonyms for those doctors. So I've got Dr. Sherry Medved and Dr. Nick Kwiatkowski. Clearly, I'm not a doctor, but for this demo here, that seems to work. But that's really all that's involved with the entity types for that. How is conversation state managed here? Pronoun references, earlier information discovered. I've kind of answered that, but essentially, anytime that you have all the pronouns and all type of stuff you would have as those synonyms. But the question as far as earlier information discovered, essentially anytime that we've collected information, we've told the system through an intent that we want to collect a bit of data. So the clinic name, a doctor name, for example, making an appointment, I've collected certain things already. All those are stored and they can be used either as conditions for routes. They can be used as in web service calls, all that type of stuff to make decisions and get data back to the user. How can I load up a list of doctors and how large can the entity list be? I haven't seen an upper limit for the entity types as far as any of those. Right now, using the web console, so essentially the view that you're seeing right here, you do have to type them in by hand. There is the ability to import them using REST calls. So you can actually make API calls to load all that data in programmatically, but for the entity types right now, you do have to put those in by hand. Now, the intents you can actually upload. In fact, I grabbed for example, for Smalltalk, there's a open source product called Smalltalk where they have different, like, the 100 recognized ways people say the word yes. I've imported that, and that's literally you just take a text document and you can upload it and it'll build those all in for you. So that piece, there's already an automated way to import those. How can I integrate DialogFlow CX with client's backend data? So that is done entirely using REST calls. So they have these the section called Webhooks where I can do REST calls to a database, and then there's a specially formatted response that it wants. So you're probably going to have to build a little bit of middleware to do that. But honestly, it'll give you, every time you make a web service call using one of these pages or an intent or anything like that, any type of fulfillment, it'll send you everything it knows about the entire session. So the history of everything that's happened so far, the sentiment of the user, all that type of stuff. And then you can make a decision on that and then respond back for either another decision, so another fulfillment. You can have it trigger a route. You can have it do all that type of stuff. Can the chatbot escalate to a live chat with an agent? Yes, it can. That's actually what it's designed for. Very similar to transferring to a live user. You can transfer to a web chat agent. That's a little bit out of the scope of this presentation here, but that is something that is built into the system. How is custom vocabulary handled? Pretty much using the entity types, you can do all the synonyms and things like that. So I again have like an entity that I'm actually searching for, but I can do synonyms for each of those custom words that may match that. So that's really done. How does the billing work on this? Is the Google a separate account, or it's added licensing to Avaya? So you're definitely gonna have to talk to your Avaya rep or your CPaSS rep in order to get the details on the licensing. But 1,000-foot view, everything on this system is billed through the Avaya CPaSS. So it is done per interaction. So it is a usage-based model based on the amount of time that users use it and the number of interactions, and that is billed through the Avaya CPaSS. So you're gonna have to talk to your contacts at Avaya CPaSS to get the exact pricing on it. But the nice thing is, if you want to test it, if you've got $5 in your pocket, you can definitely build something quick and test it and figure out if it's something that you want to work with. What about the history and interaction logging? Is this similar to DF? I'm not sure what DF is responding to, but there is the history on this is not fully built out yet, but they do have analytics. And I don't have a lot of analytics in this one here, but I'm going to jump to one of my other demos, jump to the analytics. So in this one here, there are like number of sessions that the system has been used for. But the thing that's most powerful is the different paths. So you can actually get analytics of, okay, people called in, where do they typically go? Typically to that start. Where are they going from there? Do they go to, in this case here, clinic hours? So 3% of my users went to clinic hours, 4 went to this, 16 went to this. But what's neat about this too is it also shows those bailouts as well. Did something not match, all that type of stuff. How much of a coder do you need to be able to do the webhooks? Will you need a REST guru to do this? You will need to have somebody who understands REST in order to do the webhooks. That is pretty much, I'll say that flat out. As far as how fancy you get with it, that is really up to your particular applications. It's a pretty well understood REST format. So somebody I would say who is pretty basic at web development should be able to figure it out and do something with it. But of course, if you have to interact with a backend system like Epic for appointments or anything like that, that is going to be a pretty, you're going to have to do some some fancier programming for that piece. So I don't want to say you don't need anything, but you will need to know, you'll need somebody that knows how to do REST and web services. Does the address recognition come standard, or is it a separate licensing fee? Address recognition, I'm assuming you're talking about street addresses and things like that. There is a template, so a system entity for street addresses, but I have not played with it myself. There's not a separate licensing or fee for that because it's just standard speech recognition. How do I pick a list of frequently asked questions from a website and put them in? So the DialogFlow ES, which is the non-contact center, non-agent-based system, allows you to have a frequently asked questions and essentially import that into DialogFlow. That is not something that CX supports right now. So that is not something that's in there today, but it's something that they have talked about being in their roadmap. I can't speak for Google. Again, I don't work for Google. I work for Avaya. I'm just a customer who's implemented this. But that is something that they have listed on their roadmap. Can you explain test cases? So test cases was something that we saw over here on the, let me jump back to our demo, when we were doing the test agent. So you can actually set up test cases for common responses that you want to test for. So let's say if I built a very complicated system here where I have, let's say, like maybe 10 layers deep or something like that, I don't necessarily, every time I want to test it, I don't want to have to type those in every single time. So I can actually go and do a test case where I type in common responses and it will just essentially play those back over and over again. So I can do a test case where essentially it goes and replays this really, really quickly. So I can make a change, say replay this, make a change, replay this, so I can go and do testing that way. Can this do SMS outbound notification on SMS? So the system itself, Google DialogFlow CX is built to allow this. I don't know if it's possible currently to hook that up with the Avaya CPaSS to do the text-based interactions back and forth. The Google DialogFlow system is built to allow it. I'll say that. As far as the actual implementation, I've not done that yet myself. Can you seamlessly integrate with a legacy or on-prem IVR? I don't see why you couldn't. I've not done that myself. For me, the integration that I've been testing with has been with standard vectors and VDNs. So. But I don't see why you couldn't integrate this with any type of on-prem IVR. Can review the call logs. Can they be downloaded in real time? What's the retention period? So in the Avaya CPaSS, there are call logs that you can specifically get in that, which will show inbound call numbers, how long they were on the phone, and all that type of stuff. Again, there is the analytics that you can look for, more generalized view of like what paths people are taking. But the retention period for Avaya CPaSS, I don't have an exact answer on that. But if you talk to your Avaya contacts, they should be able to tell you that. From what I've seen, it's been at least a year. It may be longer, but I'm not 100% sure on that piece. So that is all the questions that we have listed in the chat panel here. If there are any more, please continue to answer them, and I'd be happy to. But since we're running close to the end of the hour anyway, I think we are good. So wait here, just a second longer in case there's any more. Pardon?
Are there any more questions coming in, Nick?
Not that I've seen. I think I've answered all of them somehow.
Yeah, if some slide in before we close out, I'll make sure to send those over to Nick so he can answer them for you. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Nick, as well, for taking the time to speak to us today. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing by the end of the day. You can also catch Nick and other great speakers present at our upcoming virtual event, IAUG Wired, on Wednesday, February 10th. Please visit iaugwired.com to register for this free event. To see what other webinars we do have coming up and to learn more about our program, you can visit us at iaug.org/eventseducation/webcast. Please make sure to complete the short evaluation that will pop up as you exit the webinar and let us know how today's session went. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.